Welcome back to the Perspicacious Perspective. In this episode, we head to Southern Asia to unravel exactly how Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh became the countries as we know them today. I'll be addressing the colonization of India, when each country gained its independence, and what their political relations are like today. So, when did the British colonize India? The British began to colonize India in the early 17th century, though the most significant and direct phase of British colonization began in the mid-18th century. In the year 1600, the East India Company, a British trading company, was established to conduct trade with the East Indies from Southeast Asia. However, the company's attention shifted towards India due to its wealth in spices, textiles, and other goods. The East India Company established its first trading post in Surat, which is modern-day Gujarat, in year 1612. Over the next century, the company expanded its influence, setting up more trading posts in major coastal cities like Calcutta, Madras, and Mumbai. The real turning point in British control over India came after the Battle of Plassey in 1757. The East India Company, under the leadership of Robert Clive, defeated the Bengali ruler and his forces, marking the beginning of British political control in India. The victory at Plassey allowed the company to gain control of Bengal, one of the richest regions of India at the time, and laid the foundation for British imperial rule. After the Battle of Plassey, the British East India Company gradually expanded its territorial control across India, often using military force and political manipulation. By the early 19th century, the British controlled large parts of the Indian subcontinent, though other regions were still ruled by local rulers under the nominal sovereignty of the British Crown. In 1857, the Indian Rebellion, or Sepoy Mutiny, erupted, a large-scale uprising against the East India Company's rule, but it was suppressed by British forces. In response to the rebellion, the British government decided to take control of India, ending the East India Company's rule. In 1858, the British government formally took over India, marking the beginning of the British Raj. India was now directly governed by the British Crown, with a viceroy appointed to oversee its administration. During this period, the British implemented significant infrastructure projects such as railroads, roads, and telecommunication, but also exploited India's resources and subjected the population to economic policies that benefited Britain at the expense of Indian well-being. British colonization of India was a gradual process that spanned several centuries, but the most significant phase began in the mid-18th century and culminated in the formal establishment of British rule under the Raj in 1858. This period of British colonial rule profoundly impacted India's society, economy, and politics, leaving a legacy that continues to shape the subcontinent today. What was the Indian Rebellion of 1857? The Indian Rebellion of 1857 was a widespread but ultimately unsuccessful uprising against the British East India Company's rule in India. Though often referred to in British history as the Sepoy Mutiny, it is remembered in Southeast Asian history, particularly in India and Pakistan, as the first war of independence due to its scale and nationalistic undertones. The rebellion began in May 1857 and lasted until mid-1858, centering mainly in the northern and central regions of India. The causes of the rebellion were rooted in a mix of political, economic, military, and religious grievances. Politically, many Indians were disillusioned with British annexation policies, particularly the doctrine of lapse, which allowed the East India Company to seize control of princely states that lacked a direct male heir. The annexation of the Kingdom of Awadh particularly angered its nobility and population, who saw it as a betrayal of their loyalty to the British. Economically, the British had dismantled traditional industries and imposed heavy land taxes, which impoverished peasants and displaced local artisans. Socially and culturally, British reforms such as the outlawing of practices like sati, which is widow burning, and the promotion of Christian missionary activity were perceived by many Indians as an attack on their religious and cultural identity. The final spark came from within the military ranks. Indian soldiers, or sepoys, were already discontent with their pay, promotion policies, and treatment. Their anger intensified with the introduction of the Enfield rifle, whose cartridges were rumoured to be greased with cow and pig fat, offensive to both Hindus and Muslims. When asked to bite the cartridges as part of loading the rifle, many sepoys refused and tensions erupted. On May the 10th, 1857, the rebellion began in Meerut, where sepoys rose against British officers, killed many of them, and marched to Delhi, declaring the aging Mughal emperor Bahadur Shah Zafar II as the symbolic leader of the revolt. The uprising spread rapidly to other regions, and prominent leaders of the rebellion commanded local forces and inspired fierce resistance. Despite initial successes and widespread support in many areas, the rebels were poorly coordinated and lacked unified leadership. The British, leveraging superior military resources and brutal counterinsurgency tactics, gradually regained control. By mid-1858, the rebellion was largely suppressed. The British recaptured Delhi, arrested Bahadur Shah Zafar, and exiled him to Rangoon in present-day Myanmar or Burma. The consequences of the rebellion were profound. The British government dissolved the East India Company and took direct control of India through the Government of India Act 1858. This marked the beginning of the British Raj, under which India was governed by the British Crown. Military policies were restructured to ensure tighter British control, and Indians were deliberately kept in subordinate roles. While the rebellion failed in its immediate aims, it had long-lasting effects, fueling Indian nationalism and laying the groundwork for future independence movements in the 20th century. What was the British Raj like? The British Raj from 1858 to 1947 was a period of direct British colonial rule over India following the end of the East India Company's control after the Indian Rebellion of 1857, also called the Sepoy Mutiny. This era was marked by profound changes in India's society, economy, politics and culture, many of which had long-lasting effects. Though the British introduced modern infrastructure and institutions, their rule also led to widespread exploitation, inequality and division among Indians. The British formally established the British Raj in 1858 after suppressing the rebellion of 1857. The East India Company, which had previously governed India, was dissolved, and the British Crown took direct control of the country, appointing a viceroy to represent British authority. The transition was formalised by the Government of India Act 1858, marking the start of a new phase of British imperialism. India was now treated as a colony of the British Crown, and the relationship between the British and Indians became one of direct rule rather than the earlier system of indirect control through Indian rulers. One of the hallmarks of the British Raj was the economic exploitation of India. India was rich in resources such as cotton, jute, tea, and opium, which the British extracted to fuel their own industries. India's economy was restructured to serve British needs, with British traders and administrators overseeing the extraction of wealth. Indian farmers were often forced to grow cash crops like cotton and indigo instead of food crops, which contributed to frequent famines such as the Bengal famine of 1943, where millions of people died from starvation. The British also used Indian resources to build infrastructure like railways and telecommunication systems, which primarily benefited British trade and control rather than the Indian populace. Despite the exploitation, the British did bring some infrastructure development, most notably the railways, which connected different parts of India and facilitated both British administration and trade. However, these were designed to serve British interests, not the welfare of the Indian people. In many areas, India's education system was reformed with a focus on Western-style education. While this helped create an educated Indian elite, it also deepened the divide between the small number of English-educated Indians and the broader population, who remained largely illiterate and impoverished. The British Raj was also marked by significant social and cultural changes. The British introduced some social reforms, such as the banning of sati, the practice of widow burning in 1829, and the legalization of widow remarriage in 1856, but these reforms were often more about improving Britain's image than a genuine concern for Indian welfare. At the same time, British policies contributed to growing tensions between different religious and ethnic groups in India, particularly between Hindus and Muslims. The divide and rule strategy of the British exacerbated these tensions as they used religious divisions to maintain control over India. The growth of Indian nationalism was another defining feature of the British Raj. Early nationalist movements sought more representation for Indians within the colonial system, but after years of frustration with British rule, more radical forms of resistance emerged. The Indian National Congress, founded in 1885, initially aimed at securing greater rights for Indians within the British system. However, the Indian National Congress became increasingly focused on the goal of full independence. Meanwhile, the Muslim League, founded in 1906, began to advocate for the rights of Muslims in India, eventually leading to demands for a separate Muslim majority nation, Pakistan. One of the most significant movements in the fight for independence was the leadership of Mahatma Gandhi. Gandhi's philosophy of non-violent resistance became central to the Indian independence struggle. Gandhi led mass movements such as the Salt March in 1930, protesting the British monopoly on salt, and the Quit India movement of 1942, which demanded the immediate withdrawal of British forces from India. Although the Quit India movement was suppressed by the British, Gandhi's non-violent resistance inspired millions of Indians and gained international attention, galvanizing support for India's independence. The British also faced immense pressure during World War II. India contributed significantly to the British war effort, supplying troops, resources, and money. However, after the war, Britain was weakened economically and politically, and the demands for Indian independence became more difficult to ignore. The Indian National Congress and the Muslim League both pushed for independence, with the Muslim League calling for a separate Muslim state which would eventually become Pakistan. In response to the growing unrest, the British government began to negotiate with Indian leaders to bring about an orderly transfer of power. The British Raj had a profound impact on India. It transformed the country economically, socially, and politically, but it also exploited its resources and divided its people. When did India gain independence? India gained independence from British rule on August 15, 1947. At the stroke of midnight on August 15, 1947, Jawaharlal Nehru became India's first Prime Minister, delivering his famous Tryst with Destiny speech. India's newfound independence was accompanied by a complex political transition. The country adopted a provisional government, with Lord Mountbatten, the last British Viceroy, serving as the first Governor-General of independent India. India chose to be a secular, democratic republic, envisioning a future where all citizens, regardless of religion or background, could coexist harmoniously. This marked the end of nearly 200 years of British colonialism, beginning with the East India Company's control in the 18th century and transitioning to direct rule by the British Crown after the Revolt of 1857. The independence movement was led by a range of leaders and groups, most prominently the Indian National Congress, Mahatma Gandhi, Jawaharlal Nehru, Subhas Chandra Bose, and others who used methods ranging from non-violent civil disobedience to armed resistance. The path to independence was fraught with conflict as tensions between Hindus and Muslims escalated. The British, unable to maintain control over a divided India, decided to partition the country into two separate states, India and Pakistan. This decision, made in 1947, was accompanied by one of the largest mass migrations in history, as millions of people moved across the newly drawn borders, often amidst violence and bloodshed. The partition of India resulted in the creation of a Muslim-majority Pakistan and a Hindu-majority India, leading to widespread communal violence and the displacement of millions. In the midst of these tumultuous times, India faced significant challenges. The country was suddenly tasked with governing a diverse population of over 300 million, many of whom were impoverished and illiterate. India's economy was in shambles, with widespread poverty and underdeveloped industries. The migration crisis led to an enormous strain on resources as millions of refugees needed shelter, food, and rehabilitation. In addition, the issue of the princely states, over 500 semi-autonomous regions, had to be resolved. Many princely states were hesitant to join either India or Pakistan, and the process of integrating them into the Indian Union was a delicate and often coercive process. On January 30th, 1948, just a few months after independence, India suffered another blow when Mahatma Gandhi, the leader of the non-violent independence movement, was assassinated by Nathuram Godse, a Hindu nationalist. Gandhi had been tirelessly working to stop the communal violence and promote peace between Hindus and Muslims, and his death deepened the sense of loss and confusion in a newly independent India. Despite the violence and upheaval, India began its journey as a democratic nation, and in 1950, the country adopted its constitution, officially making India a sovereign republic. Jawaharlal Nehru, India's first Prime Minister, focused on nation building, advocating for industrialization, modernization, and social reforms. India's path towards a unified, democratic state was fraught with difficulties, but the country took its first steps towards creating a diverse, pluralistic society. India's independence, though a moment of triumph, was also the beginning of a new set of challenges, both internal and external. The legacy of partition continues to shape both countries, with the scars of the violence, migration, and division still felt today. The legacy of the British Raj left deep scars on the subcontinent. The partition not only created two new countries, but also sowed the seeds for decades of conflict between India and Pakistan, particularly over the disputed region of Kashmir, where there have been multiple terrorist attacks over the years. Independence was achieved at a great cost. The partition of British India created two separate nations, India and Pakistan, resulting in widespread communal violence, the displacement of millions, and the deaths of an estimated 1 to 2 million people. When did Pakistan achieve independence? Pakistan achieved independence on August 14, 1947, as a result of the partition of British India. This historic development was the culmination of decades of political struggle, communal tensions and negotiating involving Indian leaders, British colonial authorities, and key Muslim political figures. The path to Pakistan's independence is deeply tied to the broader movement for Indian independence, but with a distinct focus on the demand for a separate nation for Muslims. Under British rule since the mid-19th century, India was a vast and diverse colony, with deep religious, linguistic, and cultural divisions. Over time, a growing sense of national identity emerged, and the Indian National Congress became the main vehicle for independence. However, many Muslims felt that the Indian National Congress was dominated by Hindu interests and did not adequately represent Muslim concerns. To give Muslims a distinct political voice, the All India Muslim League was founded in 1906. Over time, especially under the leadership of Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the League began to advocate for greater protections and eventually for a separate Muslim homeland. Jinnah, once a member of the Indian National Congress, became the chief proponent of the two-nation theory, which held that Hindus and Muslims were two distinct nations with incompatible religious and cultural identities. Therefore, he argued, Muslims should have their own sovereign state. The concept of a separate Muslim state gained momentum in the 1930s and 1940s. In 1940, the Muslim League passed the Lahore Resolution, which formally demanded independent states for Muslims in the northwestern and eastern areas of India where they were in the majority. Over the next few years, Pakistan, a name coined earlier by student Chaudhry Rahmat Ali, came to represent the vision of a Muslim majority nation free from Hindu domination. Tensions between Hindus and Muslims continued to rise, especially during the 1946 elections, where the Muslim League's call for Pakistan received overwhelming support in Muslim majority areas. Communal violence broke out in several parts of India, particularly in Bengal and Punjab, intensifying the urgency for a political solution. Faced with mounting unrest and with Britain weakened after World War II, the British government decided to exit India. Negotiations between the British, the Indian National Congress, led by Jawaharlal Nehru and Mahatma Gandhi, and the Muslim League failed to produce a power-sharing agreement. In June 1947, British Viceroy Lord Mountbatten announced a plan to partition British India into two independent dominions, India and Pakistan. The Indian Independence Act was passed by the British Parliament in July 1947 and came into effect on August 15, 1947. However, Pakistan celebrates its independence on August 14, as that was when the official transfer of power occurred in Karachi, the capital of Pakistan at the time. Pakistan was created as a dominion consisting of two wings: West Pakistan, which is present-day Pakistan, and East Pakistan, which is present-day Bangladesh, over 1,000 miles away across Indian territory. The decision to divide the subcontinent into two countries was hastily executed, with the borders drawn just 2 days before independence by Sir Cyril Radcliffe, a British lawyer with no prior knowledge of Indian geography or culture. The lack of preparation and the rapid creation of these new borders contributed to widespread confusion and violence. The partition of India and the creation of Pakistan triggered one of the largest mass migrations in history, with over 10 million people crossing borders to join their respective religious majorities. This migration was marred by horrific communal violence between Hindus, Muslims and Sikhs, in which hundreds of thousands were killed and countless women were abducted or assaulted. As refugees tried to cross the borders, they were met with violent attacks, and massacres, rapes and arson were rampant. It is estimated that between 1 to 2 million people lost their lives in the violence, while millions more were displaced, leaving scars that would affect both countries for decades. While India and Pakistan were born out of the same colonial history, their paths diverged sharply, with India adopting a secular democratic model and Pakistan choosing a separate Islamic identity. The wounds inflicted by partition remained, and tensions between the two countries, particularly over the region of Kashmir, would shape much of their relationship in the years to come. Despite the chaotic and bloody birth, Pakistan emerged as an independent state under the leadership of Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who became its first Governor-General, and Liaquat Ali Khan, who became the first Prime Minister. Pakistan initially functioned as a dominion within the British Commonwealth and later became a republic in 1956. When did Bangladesh gain independence? Bangladesh gained its independence from Pakistan in 1971, following a brutal and bloody conflict known as the Bangladesh Liberation War. This war was the culmination of long-standing political, economic and cultural tensions between East Pakistan, now Bangladesh, and West Pakistan, present-day Pakistan, which had been growing ever since the two regions were joined following the 1947 partition of British India. Although East Pakistan had a larger population, it was politically marginalised and economically exploited by the ruling elite based in West Pakistan. One of the earliest and most symbolic sources of division was linguistic. In 1948, the government of Pakistan declared Urdu to be the sole national language, sparking outrage in East Pakistan, where the majority spoke Bengali. This led to the language movement of 1952, during which student protesters demanding recognition of Bengali as an official language were shot and killed by police. These events ignited a strong sense of Bengali identity and resistance that would grow steadily over the next 2 decades. Economic disparities further fueled resentment. Despite generating the majority of Pakistan's export earnings, largely through the jute industry, East Pakistan received a disproportionately small share of national resources and development funding. Additionally, political representation was consistently skewed in favour of West Pakistan, and East Pakistanis were often excluded from decision-making roles in government and the military. The final rupture came with the 1970 general elections, Pakistan's first nationwide and democratic elections. The Awami League, a political party based in East Pakistan and led by Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, won a clear majority in the National Assembly, securing 160 out of 300 seats, enough to form a government on its own. However, the ruling authorities in West Pakistan refused to honour the election results. This blatant denial of democratic process infuriated East Pakistanis and intensified the demand for autonomy. On March 25, 1971, the Pakistani military launched Operation Searchlight, a campaign of mass violence and repression in Dhaka and other parts of East Pakistan. Civilians, students and intellectuals were targeted in a brutal crackdown intended to crush the Bengali nationalist movement. The operation triggered the full-scale Bangladesh Liberation War. In response, Bengali soldiers and civilians formed the Mukti Bahini, a guerrilla resistance force that fought back against Pakistani forces. The violence quickly escalated into a humanitarian disaster. An estimated 300,000 to 3 million people were killed, and approximately 10 million refugees fled to neighbouring India, placing enormous strain on its resources. The Pakistani military's use of mass killings and widespread sexual violence during the conflict led many observers to characterise the war as a genocide. As the conflict dragged on, India, under Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, not related to Mahatma Gandhi by the way, decided to intervene militarily. On December 3, 1971, after Pakistani airstrikes on Indian air bases, India formally entered the war. In a swift and decisive campaign lasting just 13 days, Indian forces, in coordination with the Mukti Bahini guerrilla resistance force, defeated the Pakistani army. On December 16, 1971, Pakistan's Eastern Command surrendered in Dhaka, marking the official birth of Bangladesh as an independent nation. Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, who had been imprisoned in West Pakistan during much of the conflict, returned in early 1972 to become the first Prime Minister of Bangladesh. The country was soon recognised by India and Bhutan, followed by much of the international community. Pakistan, after initial resistance, formally recognised Bangladesh's independence in 1974 under pressure from global powers and the Islamic world. Thus, Bangladesh's independence was not merely a political separation, but the result of a prolonged struggle against repression, inequality, and injustice. It remains a defining moment in South Asian history, illustrating the consequences of denying a people their political voice and cultural identity. What happened after Bangladesh gained independence? After gaining independence in 1971, Bangladesh faced the enormous challenge of rebuilding a nation devastated by war, displacement, and poverty. The legacy of the Liberation War was both a source of national pride and a profound burden, as the new country sought to find its footing amid widespread destruction, a shattered economy, and the psychological scars of genocide and conflict. In 1972, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, the charismatic leader of the independence movement, returned from imprisonment in Pakistan and became Prime Minister of Bangladesh. His government adopted a secular, socialist and democratic constitution with a strong emphasis on nationalism, socialism, secularism and democracy as the four founding pillars. However, the challenges were immense. The economy was in ruins. Roads, bridges and communications were destroyed. Industries were non-functional and millions were homeless. Bangladesh was heavily reliant on foreign aid and international assistance. Despite ambitious efforts to reform land ownership, promote rural development, and nationalize key industries, progress was slow. Bureaucratic inefficiency, corruption, and a lack of infrastructure hindered effective governance. By 1974, Bangladesh was hit by a devastating famine, exacerbated by floods, crop failure, and mismanagement. The famine resulted in tens of thousands of deaths and exposed the fragility of the state. Amid growing discontent and political instability, Sheikh Mujib moved towards authoritarianism. In 1975, he amended the constitution to establish a one-party system under the Bangladesh Krishak Shramik Awami League. This move, intended to stabilize the country, alienated many and provoked strong opposition within the military and political class. In August 1975, Sheikh Mujib and most of his family were assassinated in a military coup. This ushered in a long period of military rule and political instability marked by successive coups and counter-coups. The two major figures emerged during this era. General Ziaur Rahman, who became president in the late 1970s, moved away from Mujib's socialist policies. He introduced economic liberalization, encouraged private enterprise, and shifted the country towards a more Islamic identity. Zia was assassinated in 1981. General Hussein Mohammad Ershad took power in 1982 and ruled until 1990. He continued economic reforms and sought legitimacy by emphasizing Islam in state affairs. In 1988, he made Islam the state religion, moving further away from the secular ideals of 1971. Both military rulers faced growing resistance from civil society, students, and political parties demanding a return to democracy. In 1990, after mass protests, Ershad was forced to resign, and democracy was restored through free elections in 1991. Since then, Bangladesh has alternated between two main political parties: the Awami League, led by Sheikh Hasina, who happens to be the daughter of Mujibur Rahman, and the Bangladesh Nationalist Party, founded by Ziaur Rahman and later by his widow, Khalida Zia. This era in Bangladesh has been characterized by a bitter political rivalry, which has frequently led to political violence and widespread strikes. The political landscape has also been marred by recurring allegations of electoral fraud and corruption, contributing to a cyclical pattern of democratic backsliding and episodes of authoritarian governance. Despite this political turbulence, Bangladesh has achieved notable socio-economic progress. The country has made remarkable strides in reducing poverty and lowering child mortality rates. Access to education has expanded significantly, with a strong emphasis on improving educational opportunities for girls. Bangladesh has also developed a robust ready-made garments industry, positioning itself as the world's second largest exporter of textiles. Additionally, the nation has seen considerable success in the field of microfinance, led by pioneering institutions such as the Grameen Bank, which have empowered millions of people, particularly women, to improve their economic standing. In recent years, Sheikh Hasina's Awami League has maintained a firm grip on power. Critics accuse the government of authoritarian practices, curbing press freedom, silencing dissent, and using security forces to suppress opposition. Nonetheless, her government is credited with steering major infrastructure projects and maintaining economic growth. The Liberation War remains central to Bangladesh's national identity. Martyrs and freedom fighters are honoured annually, particularly on March the 26th, Bangladesh's Independence Day, and December the 16th, referred to as Victory Day. However, how the war is remembered and politicised varies across party lines. The International Crimes Tribunal, established in 2010 to prosecute those accused of war crimes in 1971, has been a source of both justice and controversy. Today, Bangladesh is a nation that has risen from the ashes of war to make notable strides in development, even as it grapples with the challenges of democratic governance, human rights, and balancing its secular foundations with religious identity. What are the relations between India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh like today? Today, the relationships between India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh are shaped by a complex blend of shared history, ongoing disputes, and regional politics. India and Pakistan continue to have a deeply adversarial relationship, primarily due to the long-standing and unresolved conflict over Kashmir. Since the partition in 1947, the two nations have fought multiple wars and continue to face off in periodic military skirmishes along the line of control. Incidents of cross-border terrorism, such as the Pulwama attack in 2019, where a suicide bomber rammed a vehicle filled with explosives into a convoy of Central Reserve Police Force personnel, killing 40 Central Reserve Police Force soldiers, and as recently as April 2025, where 5 armed militants, believed to be an offshoot of a Pakistan-based terrorist group, opened fire on a group of tourists, killing 28 civilians, have further strained relations, and diplomatic ties often remain frozen for long periods. Trade and cultural exchanges between India and Pakistan are minimal, and trust is virtually absent, though both countries maintain back-channel communications to prevent escalation, especially given their nuclear capabilities. In contrast, India and Bangladesh enjoy relatively warm and cooperative relations. India played a crucial role in Bangladesh's liberation from Pakistan in 1971, and that foundational support continues to influence diplomatic goodwill. In recent years, both countries have deepened their economic and infrastructural partnerships, worked together on broader security, and sought to improve regional connectivity. However, certain irritants persist, such as disputes over the sharing of river waters, concerns about illegal migration, and occasional border tensions. Nonetheless, under the leadership of Prime Ministers Narendra Modi and Sheikh Hasina, the two nations have managed to build a relationship largely characterized by mutual interest and regional cooperation. The relationship between Pakistan and Bangladesh remains diplomatically distant and politically sensitive. The painful legacy of the 1971 war continues to cast a long shadow, particularly due to Pakistan's reluctance to issue a formal apology for the atrocities committed during the conflict. Bangladesh has pursued accountability for war crimes committed by pro-Pakistan forces, a process that has been condemned by Pakistan and has further strained relations. Although the two countries maintain formal diplomatic channels, their engagement remains limited and genuine reconciliation has proven difficult. In the broader regional context, India plays a dominant role in Southeast Asia, which elicits a mixture of cooperation and caution from its neighbours. Both Pakistan and Bangladesh carefully navigate their ties with India, while also engaging with external powers like China to balance regional dynamics. While the historical bonds between the three countries remain undeniable, their political relationships today reflect divergent national identities, unresolved grievances, and competing strategic interests.